The envelope in my mailbox had the HOA logo stamped on it, and I knew before opening it that my day was about to get worse. I stood there in the freezing February wind outside my house in Boulder, Colorado, staring at the formal notice that accused me of violating community air quality standards because of smoke from my chimney. A $500 fine, with another $500 added for each week I failed to comply. My name is Trevor Whitmore, and I had just become the latest target of our neighborhood's power-hungry HOA president. I walked back inside my two-story craftsman home, the warmth from the wood-burning fireplace hitting me as soon as I crossed the threshold. My wife used to love sitting by this fireplace before she passed away 3 years ago. Now it was one of the few comforts I had left during these cold Colorado winters. I read through the notice again, my hands shaking with a mixture of anger and disbelief. According to the letter, signed by one Patricia Henderson, the HOA president, multiple residents had complained about excessive smoke emissions from my property. The letter cited Section 14.7 of the community bylaws, which I had never heard of, stating that no homeowner shall create conditions that negatively impact air quality or create nuisance conditions for neighboring properties. There was a grainy photograph attached showing my chimney with a small amount of smoke rising from it, taken at what looked like dawn or dusk, when the lighting made everything appear more dramatic. I grabbed my laptop and pulled up the HOA bylaws I had received when I bought the house 8 years ago. I searched for Section 14.7, but there was nothing about air quality or smoke emissions. The document ended at Section 12, covering basic things like lawn maintenance and exterior paint colors. I checked the date on my copy and then looked at the letter again. The bylaws had apparently been amended 6 months ago, and according to a tiny footnote at the bottom of the notice, all residents had been informed via email. I checked my email, searching for anything from the HOA. Nothing from 6 months ago. I expanded my search to the entire previous year. Still, nothing except the monthly newsletters that mostly talked about upcoming community events and reminders to pay HOA fees on time. Either the email had never been sent, or it had somehow ended up in spam and been automatically deleted. Either way, I had no knowledge of this new rule, and now I was being fined for breaking it. The next morning, I drove to Patricia Henderson's house, a sprawling ranch-style home at the entrance of our subdivision. She had positioned herself in the biggest house closest to the main road, like a spider at the center of its web. I rang the doorbell and waited, rehearsing what I wanted to say. I needed to stay calm and reasonable. Patricia opened the door wearing a purple velour tracksuit and holding a small white dog that immediately started yapping at me. She was in her mid-50s with blonde highlights that were a shade too bright for her complexion and a permanent expression that suggested she smelled something unpleasant. "Trevor," she said, drawing out my name like it was exhausting just to say it. "I assume you received the notice." "I did, and I need to talk to you about it. Can I come in?" She glanced behind her, then stepped out onto the porch instead, closing the door. The little dog continued barking from inside. "This really isn't a good time. I have a conference call in 15 minutes. This will only take a minute." "Patricia, I never received any notification about changes to the bylaws. I had no idea there was a new rule about chimney smoke. The email was sent to all residents on August 15th of last year. If you didn't receive it, that's a personal email management issue, not an HOA problem. Can you show me proof that the email was sent to my address?" Her expression hardened. "I don't have to prove anything to you. The bylaws were properly amended following a board vote, and residents were notified according to established procedures. Your lack of attention to HOA communications doesn't exempt you from following the rules. I took a deep breath. Even if I accept that, the fine seems excessive for something like this. I'm just heating my home. Everyone in this neighborhood with a fireplace creates some smoke. Not everyone creates the amount of smoke you do. We've had 4 separate complaints from your neighbors about the excessive emissions from your chimney. It's becoming a health concern. A health concern. Patricia, it's a wood-burning fireplace. People have used them for thousands of years. Times change, Trevor. We live in an environmentally conscious community, and we have standards. If you can't meet those standards, perhaps you should consider selling and moving somewhere more suitable for your lifestyle. The casual cruelty of that statement hit me like a slap. She knew I had lost my wife, knew that this house held memories I wasn't ready to give up. Before I could respond, she had opened her door and stepped back inside. You have until the end of next week to cease using your fireplace, or additional fines will be assessed. Good day, Trevor. The door closed in my face. I stood there on her porch for a long moment, fury building in my chest. Then I walked back to my truck and sat in the driver's seat, trying to figure out my next move. I could pay the fine and stop using my fireplace, but the principle of the thing gnawed at me. I had done nothing wrong. I was heating my home in the middle of winter using a legal, properly installed fireplace. The smoke from my chimney was no different than anyone else's. My phone rang. It was my neighbor, Dennis Murphy, who lived 2 houses down from me. Trevor, did you get a letter from the HOA about your fireplace? Yeah, I just came from Patricia's house. She wouldn't even discuss it with me. That's because she's on a crusade. Listen, my wife told me that Patricia has been going around the neighborhood taking pictures of everyone's chimneys when they're smoking. She's looking for violations she can enforce. But why? What does she gain from this? Power, mostly. You know her son got arrested for a DUI last year, right? Ever since then, she's been doubling down on the HOA president thing, like she needs to feel in control of something. You're just the first one she decided to target. Dennis, do you have a fireplace? Yeah, but we haven't used it in weeks. My wife saw Patricia lurking around the neighborhood with her camera, and she told me to just use the central heating until this whole thing blows over. So everyone's just going to give in to her. There was a long pause. Look, Trevor, I know it's not fair. But fighting the HOA is expensive and time-consuming. Most people would rather just comply than deal with the hassle. After I hung up with Dennis, I sat in my truck and did some research on my phone. I found several articles about HOA overreach and homeowners who had successfully fought back. The key seemed to be documentation and evidence. If I could prove that my fireplace emissions were actually negligible and not a health concern, I might have grounds to challenge the fine. I called a company in Denver that did air quality testing. The woman who answered explained that they could come out and do a comprehensive analysis of the smoke from my chimney, measuring particulate matter and comparing it to EPA standards. It would cost $1,200, more than the current fine. But if it proved my case, it would be worth it. How soon can you come out? I asked. We have an opening this Thursday if you can be home between 9 and 2. I'll be there. I scheduled the appointment and then drove home, already composing an email to the HOA board in my head. I wasn't going to roll over on this. If Patricia wanted a fight, she was going to get one. That evening, I drafted a formal response to the HOA notice. I pointed out that I had no record of receiving notification about the bylaw change, requested proof of the email being sent to my address, questioned the validity of complaints from unnamed neighbors, and informed them that I had commissioned an independent air quality test to verify that my fireplace emissions were within acceptable standards. I also demanded copies of any complaints filed against me, as I had a right to know who was making accusations that resulted in financial penalties. I sent the email to the main HOA address and copied all 5 board members, whose contact information was listed on the community website. Within an hour, Patricia called me. I almost didn't answer but decided I wanted to hear what she had to say. "Trevor, I just read your email and I have to say, I'm very disappointed by your hostile tone." Hostile? I asked legitimate questions and informed you that I'm gathering evidence for my defense. That's not hostile. That's responsible. Spending $1,200 on an air quality test is ridiculous. Just stop using your fireplace. It's my home, Patricia. I have a legal right to use a properly installed fireplace to heat it. Not if it violates community standards, you don't. The HOA has the authority to regulate activities that negatively impact other residents. Then, show me the complaints. Show me evidence that my fireplace smoke is actually causing a problem beyond your personal opinion. I don't have to show you anything. The board has reviewed the situation and determined that you're in violation. You can either comply or continue racking up fines. Your choice. She hung up before I could respond. Over the next few days, I received responses from 2 of the other board members. 1. A retired accountant named Richard Sterling sent a brief email saying he supported Patricia's decision and that the board stood united on enforcement issues. The other, a woman named Linda Chen who worked as a school teacher, sent a more sympathetic message saying she understood my frustration, but that the board had voted to approve the new bylaws, and she felt obligated to support their enforcement. I wrote back to Linda, asking if she could at least request that Patricia provide evidence of the complaints and proof that residents were notified about the bylaw changes. She responded that she would bring it up at the next board meeting, which wasn't scheduled for another 3 weeks. Thursday morning arrived, and the air quality testing team showed up right at 9. There were 2 technicians, both young guys who looked like they were in their late 20s. They introduced themselves as Marcus and Joel and started unloading equipment from their van. "So what exactly are you going to measure?" I asked as they set up. Marcus, the taller one with a beard, explained. "We'll measure particulate matter in the air around your property, both with the fireplace burning and without. We'll also use specialized equipment to analyze the actual smoke coming from your chimney. We'll be measuring PM 2.5 and PM 10 levels, which are the standard metrics for air quality. Then, we'll compare everything to EPA standards and local air quality regulations." They spent the first hour taking baseline measurements around my yard and the neighboring properties. Then I lit a fire in my fireplace using the same type of seasoned oak I always burned. The technicians waited for the fire to reach a steady state, then began their measurements. I watched them work, feeling a strange mixture of anxiety and vindication. I knew my fireplace wasn't creating a hazardous situation, but having professional verification would make all the difference. Around noon, Joel came to find me in the kitchen where I was making lunch. "We're about done with the measurements. Marcus is crunching the numbers now, but I can tell you unofficially that your emissions are well within normal parameters for a residential wood-burning fireplace. Actually, you're running cleaner than most because you're using properly seasoned wood. A lot of people burn green wood or trash, which creates way more smoke and particulates. When will I get the official report? We'll have it ready by tomorrow afternoon. We'll email you a PDF and also send a hard copy by mail." After they left, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. I had evidence now. Real, professional evidence that my fireplace wasn't creating any kind of health hazard or air quality problem. Patricia would have to back down. The report arrived via email the next afternoon, just as Joel had promised. It was 23 pages long, full of graphs and technical data, but the conclusion was clear and unambiguous. Emissions from the wood-burning fireplace at the subject property are consistent with normal residential use and fall well within EPA guidelines for acceptable air quality standards. Particulate matter measurements taken at property boundaries and neighboring properties show negligible impact from the subject fireplace. Emissions are comparable to or lower than typical residential sources such as gas-powered lawn equipment, automobiles, and outdoor grills. I printed out 3 copies of the report and immediately sent a new email to the HOA board, attaching the full PDF. I kept my message brief and professional. Please find attached the results of an independent air quality assessment conducted by a certified environmental testing company. As the report clearly demonstrates, emissions from my fireplace are negligible and well within all applicable standards. I am requesting that the fine be rescinded and that this matter be closed. I am willing to present these findings at the next board meeting if necessary. Patricia's response came within 20 minutes. The report you commissioned is irrelevant. The HOA bylaws do not require scientific proof of air quality violations. Multiple residents have complained about your excessive smoke, and that is sufficient grounds for enforcement action. The fine stands. I read her email 3 times, unable to believe what I was seeing. She was simply dismissing scientific evidence because it didn't support her position. This had crossed the line from bureaucratic petness into something more concerning. I called Linda Chen, the board member who had seemed most reasonable. She answered on the 3rd ring and I could hear children's voices in the background. "Linda, it's Trevor Whitmore. Do you have a minute?" "Oh, hi, Trevor. Sure, give me a second." I heard her moving to a quieter location. "Okay, what's going on?" "I just sent the board an air quality report that proves my fireplace emissions are negligible." Patricia responded by saying the report is irrelevant and that the fine stands. "Linda, this isn't right. I have scientific proof that I'm not creating an air quality problem." She sighed. "I saw your email and the report. Trevor, I'm going to be honest with you. Patricia has been very difficult to work with lately. She's become obsessed with finding violations and generating fine revenue for the HOA. Fine revenue? Why does the HOA need more money? We don't really. Our reserves are healthy, but Patricia has been pushing for expensive upgrades to the community entrance and common areas. She wants to install new landscaping, decorative lighting, the whole thing. The board hasn't approved it because it's unnecessary, so I think she's trying to build up a larger reserve fund to make her case stronger. So she's fining me to fund her vanity project. I can't say that for certain, but the timing is suspicious. You're the 3rd person she's gone after in the last 2 months. She fined the Johnsons for having their garbage cans visible from the street, even though they were just taking the trash out on collection day. And she fined Mr. Peterson for having a lawn ornament she deemed offensive, even though it was just a garden gnome. Why isn't anyone pushing back on this? Most people just pay the fines rather than fight. It's usually easier and cheaper. But Trevor, if you want to fight this, I'll support you. What you're experiencing isn't fair, and that air quality report is solid evidence. What can I do? You can request a formal hearing before the full board. Patricia has to grant it if you make an official request. Present your evidence, and the board will vote on whether to uphold or dismiss the fine. I can't promise you'll win, but at least you'll have a chance to make your case. And if the board votes against me, then you'd have to take it to small claims court, which gets expensive and time-consuming. But honestly, with the evidence you have, I think you'd have a good chance at a hearing." I thanked Linda and immediately drafted a formal request for a hearing. I sent it to the HOA email address and copied all board members, citing the specific section of the bylaws that granted homeowners the right to contest fines and enforcement actions. Patricia tried to delay the hearing, claiming that scheduling conflicts made it impossible to convene the board for several weeks. But I sent a follow-up email pointing out that according to the bylaws, a hearing had to be scheduled within 10 business days of a formal request. Linda backed me up, and finally, Patricia agreed to hold the hearing the following Tuesday evening at 7 at the community clubhouse. Over the weekend, I prepared my presentation. I printed out copies of the air quality report for each board member, created a simple slide presentation highlighting the key findings, and drafted a statement explaining my position. I also did more digging into the bylaw amendment process and discovered something interesting. According to Colorado HOA law, certain types of bylaw amendments required a vote of the full membership, not just the board. Major changes to homeowner rights and new fine structures fell into that category. I called an attorney who specialized in HOA law, a woman named Sarah Fitzgerald who had good reviews online. She agreed to look over the documents, and I sent her copies of the original bylaws, the amendment creating Section 14.7, and all the correspondence with Patricia. She called me back on Monday afternoon. "Trevor, I think you have a strong case." The bylaw amendment creating this air quality provision should have required a membership vote. The board didn't have the authority to unilaterally create a new fine structure for something as vague as air quality complaints. Additionally, Colorado law requires HOAs to provide proper notice of bylaw changes, and simply sending an email doesn't necessarily meet that standard, especially if there's no proof of delivery. So the whole fine is invalid, potentially, yes, but there's a more immediate problem. If the board votes to uphold the fine at your hearing, they'll likely argue that you had an opportunity to contest it and lost, which makes it harder to challenge later. My advice would be to present your air quality evidence, but also raise the legal issues with the bylaw amendment process. Put them on notice that this fine is based on an invalid rule. Will that make them back down? Maybe, maybe not, but it strengthens your position if you do end up having to take this to court. Tuesday evening, I arrived at the community clubhouse 15 minutes early. The clubhouse was a modest building near the neighborhood pool, mainly used for summer parties and occasional meetings. I set up my laptop and connected it to the projector, loading up my presentation. The 5 board members arrived together, which struck me as odd. Patricia led the way, followed by Richard Sterling, Linda Chen, and 2 other members I rarely saw. Margaret Russo, who was probably in her 70s and seemed to mostly go along with whatever Patricia wanted, and Tom Brennan, a younger guy who worked in tech and usually seemed distracted during HOA business. Patricia called the meeting to order with a formal tone that felt practiced. "We're here tonight to hear Trevor Whitmore's contest of the fine issued for air quality violations stemming from excessive chimney smoke. Trevor, you have 15 minutes to present your case." I stood up, trying to project more confidence than I felt. "Thank you. I want to start by showing you the results of an independent air quality test I commissioned." I went through the presentation, highlighting the key findings. The testing company had measured particulate levels well below EPA thresholds. The smoke from my chimney dissipated normally and created no measurable impact on neighboring properties. The technicians had even compared my emissions to other common sources and found my fireplace to be cleaner than most gas-powered equipment. Margaret Russo raised her hand. But what about the smell? The report doesn't address whether your smoke smells bad. Wood smoke has a smell, yes, but it's not a pollutant or a health hazard. It's a natural smell that most people associate with winter and cozy fires. There's been no complaint about smell specifically, only vague concerns about excessive smoke. Patricia cut in. We've had multiple complaints from residents about your chimney smoke creating a nuisance. Whether or not it meets EPA standards is beside the point. Actually, it's exactly the point. You fine me for air quality violations. This report proves there is no air quality violation. And speaking of those complaints, I requested copies of them in my initial response, but I never received any. I have a right to know who complained and what specifically they complained about. The identities of complainants are kept confidential to protect residents from retaliation. I'm not asking for retaliation. I'm asking for basic due process. You can't fine me based on anonymous complaints that may or may not even exist. Richard Sterling spoke up. Patricia showed the board the complaints. They exist. Then show them to me. Redact the names if you want, but let me see what was actually reported. Patricia's face was getting red. This is not a court of law, Trevor. We don't have to provide you with discovery. The board has reviewed the evidence and determined that you're in violation. That's all you need to know. I decided it was time to play my other card. There's another issue we need to address. The bylaw section I'm being fined under, Section 14.7, was apparently added 6 months ago through a board amendment. However, according to Colorado law, specifically the Colorado Common Interest Ownership Act, amendments that create new fine structures or significantly restrict homeowner rights require a vote of the full membership, not just the board. This fine is based on a bylaw that was improperly enacted. The room went quiet. Tom Brennan leaned forward, suddenly interested. Is that true? I thought we could amend the bylaws by board vote. Linda spoke up. Some amendments can be done by board vote, but major changes require membership approval. Trevor might be right about this. Patricia's voice was sharp. Our attorney reviewed the amendment process, and everything was done correctly. Then you won't mind if I have my attorney review it as well, I said. Because if this bylaw is invalid, then every fine issued under it is also invalid. Are you threatening the board with legal action? Patricia demanded. I'm asking the board to dismiss an unfair fine that's based on questionable legal authority and contradicted by scientific evidence. If that's not possible, then yes, I'm prepared to take further action to protect my rights as a homeowner. Margaret raised her hand again. Can we have a moment to confer as a board? This is a hearing, not a trial, Patricia snapped. We don't need to confer. Trevor has presented his case, and now we'll vote. But Linda shook her head. Actually, I think we should take a short break to discuss this. Trevor has raised some serious legal questions, and we should be careful about how we proceed. Patricia looked like she wanted to argue, but Richard nodded in agreement, and Margaret was already standing up. Fine. 15-minute recess. The board members filed into a side room, leaving me alone in the main meeting area. I sat down and tried to calm my racing heart. I had no idea which way this would go. 20 minutes later, they came back. Patricia's expression was cold and controlled, but I noticed that Linda looked satisfied and Tom seemed uncomfortable. The board has discussed the matter, Patricia announced. We are prepared to vote on whether to uphold or dismiss the fine. All in favor of upholding the fine. Patricia and Margaret raised their hands immediately. Richard hesitated, then slowly raised his as well. 3 votes. All opposed. Linda and Tom raised their hands. 2 votes. The fine is upheld by a vote of 3-2. This hearing is adjourned. I felt anger surge through me, but I kept my voice level. This isn't over. I'll be consulting with my attorney about next steps. You're free to do whatever you feel is necessary, Patricia said. But I'd advise you to consider whether spending thousands of dollars in legal fees is worth it over a $500 fine. It's not about the money, it's about the principle. Then you're a fool, she said and walked out. I packed up my laptop and left the clubhouse, my hands shaking with frustration. Linda caught up with me in the parking lot. Trevor, I'm sorry. I tried to get them to see reason, but Patricia has too much influence over Margaret and Richard. What did you guys discuss in that side room? Tom and I both raised concerns about the legal issues you mentioned. Patricia insisted that our attorney had approved everything, but she couldn't provide any documentation. Richard said we should support the president's decision, and Margaret just went along with it like always. So what do I do now? Fight it. Take it to court if you have to. What Patricia is doing isn't right, and someone needs to stand up to her. I drove home and immediately called Sarah Fitzgerald, my attorney. I left a voicemail explaining what had happened and asking her to call me back as soon as possible. She called the next morning. Trevor, I've been doing some more research. I think you have grounds for a lawsuit, but there's a faster way to handle this. You can file a complaint with the Colorado Department of Regulatory Agencies. They oversee HOAs and can investigate complaints about improper bylaw amendments and enforcement actions. It's free to file, and they have the authority to order the HOA to reverse their decision. How long does that take? Usually a few months for an investigation and ruling. But in the meantime, you need to be careful. If you don't pay the fine, the HOA can place a lien on your property. A lien for $500. HOAs have broad authority to collect fines through liens and even foreclosure in extreme cases. I'd recommend paying the fine under protest while we pursue the complaint. That way, they can't escalate the situation while we're fighting this through proper channels. I hated the idea of giving Patricia the satisfaction, but Sarah's advice made sense. I wrote a check for $500 and mailed it to the HOA with a letter clearly stating that I was paying under protest and reserving all rights to challenge the fine. Then Sarah helped me file a formal complaint with the state agency, laying out everything. The questionable bylaw amendment process, the lack of proper notice to homeowners, the arbitrary enforcement based on anonymous complaints, and the board's refusal to accept scientific evidence. While we waited for the state to respond, I decided to do some investigating of my own. Patricia had mentioned multiple complaints from neighbors, but I suspected that was an exaggeration. I started talking to the people who lived around me. The family directly next door, the Martins, told me they had never complained about my fireplace. We barely even notice it, the husband said. And honestly, we love the smell of wood smoke. It reminds me of my childhood in Vermont. The house on the other side was occupied by a young couple, both doctors who worked long shifts at the hospital. They weren't home much and said they had never even thought about my chimney. I worked my way around to all the houses that had a clear view of my property. None of them had complained. Several people mentioned that Patricia had been going around taking pictures and asking if they had noticed any problems with smoke or odors, but when they said no, she had moved on to the next house. Finally, I talked to an elderly woman named Dorothy who lived 3 houses down. She looked uncomfortable when I asked about complaints. Trevor, I'm sorry about all this. Patricia came to my house about a month ago with a clipboard. She told me there was a serious air quality problem in the neighborhood and asked if I would sign a statement saying I had noticed excessive smoke. I told her I hadn't noticed anything unusual, but she was very persistent. She kept talking about health risks and said that as someone in my age bracket, I should be especially concerned about air pollution. She made it sound like I would be protecting the community by signing. So you signed a complaint even though you hadn't actually noticed a problem. I'm not proud of it, but yes. She made me feel like I was being irresponsible if I didn't. After I thought about it more, I felt terrible. I should have stood my ground. Did anyone else sign? I think she got Margaret Russo to sign one, but Margaret is on the board with her, so that makes sense. And possibly one or two other people, but I'm not sure who. I thanked Dorothy and headed home, my mind racing. Patricia had essentially manufactured complaints by pressuring vulnerable residents. That had to be some kind of ethical violation, if not an outright fraud. Over the next 2 weeks, additional fines started appearing in my mailbox. Patricia was assessing $500 per week for continued violations, even though I had stopped using my fireplace entirely after paying the initial fine. I called her immediately. "Patricia, I'm not even using my fireplace anymore, and you're still fining me." "You were observed using it last Wednesday evening." "No, I wasn't. I haven't lit a fire in 2 weeks. We have photographic evidence that says otherwise." "Then show me the photo." "I'll mail it with your next fine notice." She hung up, and I felt my frustration boiling over. This was harassment, pure and simple. Patricia was making up violations to keep fining me. When the next fine notice arrived, it included a photograph of a house with smoke coming from the chimney. The problem was, it wasn't my house. The photo showed a 2-story home with smoke rising from a brick chimney, but the house had white siding. My house had gray siding. The chimney placement was also wrong. I looked at the image more carefully and realized it was the Patterson house, 4 doors down from me. They had a similar style home, and Patricia had apparently either mistaken it for mine or deliberately used the wrong photo, hoping I wouldn't notice. I had finally caught her in an outright lie. I took several photos of my house, clearly showing the gray siding and the chimney location, then took photos of the Patterson house showing the white siding and their chimney. I documented everything and sent it to Sarah, my attorney. "This is good," she said when she called me back. "This shows a pattern of fraudulent enforcement. The state investigators will want to see this. But Trevor, I think it's time to consider taking more aggressive action. What Patricia is doing crosses the line into potential fraud and harassment. You might want to file a police report." The police. For HOA fines, for fraudulent documentation and harassment. She's deliberately misrepresenting facts to extract money from you. That's not just an HOA dispute, that's potentially criminal behavior. I thought about it for a long moment. Taking this to the police felt like a massive escalation. But Sarah was right. Patricia had moved beyond bureaucratic petness into something more serious. The next day, I went to the Boulder Police Department and asked to speak with someone about filing a report. I was directed to a detective named Maria Gonzalez, who listened to my story with growing interest. "You have documentation of all this?" she asked. I showed her everything. The original fine notice, the air quality report, my payment made under protest, the subsequent fine notices, and most importantly, the photograph Patricia had sent showing the wrong house. "That's pretty brazen," Detective Gonzalez said. "She's either incredibly careless or she assumed you wouldn't notice. Let me look into this. I need to check if what she's doing rises to the level of criminal fraud, but at minimum, this is a civil matter with some potentially criminal elements." Over the next week, I learned that Detective Gonzalez had contacted Patricia and requested all documentation related to the fines issued against me. Patricia apparently became defensive and hostile, insisting that the police had no jurisdiction over HOA matters. The detective informed her that fraud and harassment were always police matters, regardless of the context. Patricia called an emergency board meeting, and according to Linda Chen, who gave me a detailed report afterward, things got heated. Patricia insisted that Trevor Whitmore was harassing her by involving the police in a simple HOA enforcement matter. Linda and Tom argued that if Patricia had done everything correctly, she had nothing to worry about from a police investigation. Richard and Margaret stayed mostly quiet, clearly uncomfortable with how far things had escalated. The meeting ended with no clear resolution, but Linda told me that Tom had privately said he was considering resigning from the board if Patricia continued with this aggressive enforcement approach. 2 weeks later, I received a letter from the Colorado Department of Regulatory Agencies. They were opening a formal investigation into the HOA's bylaw amendment process and enforcement procedures. As part of the investigation, they were ordering the HOA to cease all collection activities related to the disputed fines until the investigation concluded. Patricia called me that evening, and her voice was different. The aggressive confidence was gone, replaced by something that sounded almost like fear. "Trevor, I think we've let this situation get out of hand. The board has discussed it, and we're prepared to offer a settlement. We'll rescind all fines related to your fireplace use if you agree to drop the state complaint and the police report." "Why would I do that? The state is already investigating, and they've told you to stop collections. Because this is tearing apart our community. Neighbors are taking sides, the board is divided, and it's all become very unpleasant. Let's just end this. Patricia, you fined me for something I didn't do. You manufactured complaints, you used fraudulent photographs, and you've been harassing me for months. I'm not dropping anything. I'm going to see this through. You're making a mistake. If you pursue this, I'll have to defend myself, and that means exposing every detail to public scrutiny. Things will come out that might embarrass you." "Like what?" "Like the fact that you've been burning wood that creates excessive smoke, potentially exposing the neighborhood to health risks. I have a professional air quality report that says exactly the opposite. You have nothing, Patricia. That's why you're calling me to beg for a settlement." "I'm not begging for anything. I'm trying to be reasonable." "No, you're trying to save yourself. The state investigators are going to find that you improperly amended the bylaws, and the police are going to confirm that you used fraudulent evidence to issue fines. You know what you did was wrong, and now you're facing consequences." She hung up without another word. The state investigation took 2 more months. During that time, several interesting things happened. First, Tom Brennan did resign from the HOA board, citing personal reasons but privately telling several neighbors that he couldn't support Patricia's leadership anymore. His resignation meant there was an open board seat, and elections were scheduled. Second, Detective Gonzalez concluded her investigation and sent a report to the district attorney's office. While they ultimately decided not to pursue criminal charges against Patricia, citing the difficulty of proving criminal intent in an HOA dispute, the detective's report was damning. It documented the fraudulent photograph, the questionable complaints, and Patricia's repeated refusal to provide documentation when requested. Third, and most surprisingly, several other homeowners came forward with their own stories of problematic fines and enforcement actions by Patricia. The Johnsons, who had been fined for visible garbage cans, filed their own complaint with the state. Mr. Peterson, who had been fined for the garden gnome, did the same. A woman named Carol Williams came forward with a story about being fined for having a lawn that was allegedly too brown during a drought, even though the HOA itself had sent out newsletters encouraging water conservation. A pattern was emerging, and it wasn't pretty. Patricia had been using her position to generate fine revenue through aggressive and often questionable enforcement. The state investigators took note. In early May, I received the final report from the Department of Regulatory Agencies. It was 37 pages long, but the conclusions were clear and devastating for Patricia. First, the bylaw amendment creating Section 14.7 had been improperly enacted. Changes that created new fine structures required either a membership vote or a more rigorous amendment process than what the board had used. The amendment was deemed invalid. Second, the HOA had failed to provide proper notice of bylaw changes to homeowners. Simply sending an email did not meet Colorado's requirements for notice, especially when there was no proof of delivery. Third, the enforcement of fines against me and several other homeowners had been arbitrary and not based on clear violations of properly enacted rules. The state ordered the HOA to immediately rescind all fines issued under Section 14.7 and to refund any money collected. Fourth, and most seriously, the state found that Patricia Henderson had engaged in conduct unbecoming of an HOA board member and recommended that the full membership consider removing her from the board. I received a check from the HOA for $500, my refunded fine, along with a formal letter of apology signed by all remaining board members except Patricia. The HOA called a special meeting to discuss Patricia's future on the board. The community clubhouse was packed with homeowners, many of whom I had never seen at an HOA meeting before. Patricia sat at the board table looking defiant, her arms crossed over her chest. Linda Chen, now serving as acting president after Tom's resignation, called the meeting to order. She outlined the findings of the state investigation and explained that, under the HOA bylaws, the membership had the right to vote to remove a board member for cause. Patricia was given an opportunity to speak in her own defense. She stood up and addressed the crowd with a quavering voice that became stronger as she went on. I have served this community for 7 years. I've organized events, maintained our standards, and worked countless hours to keep our neighborhood beautiful and our property values high. Yes, I enforced rules that some people didn't like. That's part of being on the board. You can't please everyone. Trevor Whitmore and a few others have made me out to be some kind of villain because I asked them to follow the rules. This whole investigation has been blown out of proportion by people who don't want to be accountable to community standards. Several people in the audience shifted uncomfortably. Patricia was trying to reframe the narrative, making herself the victim of ungrateful homeowners. Then I stood up. Linda recognized me and gave me the floor. Patricia talks about enforcing rules, but the state investigation found that the rules she was enforcing didn't legally exist. She talks about accountability, but she refused to provide any evidence of the complaints she claimed to have received. And she talks about being made out to be a villain, but she used a photograph of someone else's house to justify fining me. That's not enforcement, that's fraud. The room erupted in murmurs. Several people called out questions. Is that true? She used a fake photograph. I held up the photo Patricia had sent me and a photo of my actual house. This is what she sent me as proof that I was violating the rules. As you can see, it's not even my house. Patricia's face went red. That was an honest mistake. I was taking dozens of photographs. Then why didn't you correct it when I pointed it out? Instead, you sent me another fine. She had no answer for that. The vote was held by secret ballot. Out of 73 homeowners present, 61 voted to remove Patricia from the board. She left the meeting without speaking to anyone, walking quickly to her car while several people tried to approach her. In the weeks that followed, The HOA held elections for the open board seats. Linda Chen was elected president, and several new members joined, including Carol Williams and Dennis Murphy. One of their first actions was to review all fines issued in the past 2 years and refund anything that seemed questionable. They also established new procedures requiring board decisions on fines to be documented with clear evidence and providing homeowners with more robust appeal processes. The bylaws were reviewed by an attorney specializing in HOA law, and several provisions that were outdated or legally questionable were amended through a proper membership vote. I was invited to serve on a new homeowner rights committee, which I accepted. We worked to create guidelines ensuring that future boards couldn't abuse their authority the way Patricia had. Patricia's house went on the market in June. According to Dennis, who heard it from a real estate agent friend, she and her husband were divorcing and splitting assets. The stress of the HOA situation had apparently been the final straw in an already troubled marriage. I felt a moment of sympathy for her, but then I remembered the months of harassment and the fraudulent fines, and the feeling passed. She had brought this on herself through her own actions. On a warm evening in July, I sat on my back porch with a glass of whiskey, watching the sun set over the mountains. The fireplace inside was cold, as it would remain until fall, but I knew that when winter came again, I would light it without fear of harassment or unjust fines. Dennis came by to drop off some tools he had borrowed. He sat down and accepted a beer from my cooler. "Quite a few months, huh?" he said. "That's an understatement. You know, a lot of people in the neighborhood were talking about you behind your back at first, saying you were making a big deal over nothing, that you should have just paid the fine and moved on. I know, I could hear the whispers. But now everyone's glad you fought it. Patricia was just getting started. If you hadn't stood up to her, she would have kept going, finding new things to fine people for, making everyone miserable. You did the neighborhood a favor." "I just wanted to use my fireplace," I said with a laugh. "Sometimes standing up for a small thing means standing up for a big principle," Dennis said. "You proved that HOAs don't get to just run roughshod over homeowners. There are rules they have to follow too." After Dennis left, I thought about his words. The whole experience had been exhausting and frustrating, but also strangely empowering. I had learned that you could fight back against bureaucratic overreach, even when it seemed easier to just give in. Documentation mattered. Evidence mattered. And standing up for your rights, even when it was uncomfortable, could make a real difference. My phone buzzed with a text from Linda Chen. "Board meeting next Tuesday. Can you make it? Want to run some new policy proposals past you." I texted back confirming I would be there. The HOA that had once been a source of anxiety and frustration was slowly becoming something more positive, a genuine community organization that worked for homeowners rather than against them. As the stars came out and the temperature dropped, I went inside and looked at my fireplace. It was clean and ready for the next season. The wood rack outside was already stocked with seasoned oak. When the first cold snap hit in September or October, I would light a fire without a second thought, knowing that I had earned that right through months of determination and effort. The air quality report still sat in a folder on my desk, a reminder that facts and evidence could triumph over arbitrary authority. The check refunding my fine was long since deposited, but I kept the letter of apology from the HOA board. Not because I was petty, but because it represented something important: accountability. Over the following months, the neighborhood continued to heal from the divisions Patricia's tenure had created. Summer block parties returned to being fun social events, rather than tense gatherings where everyone worried about potential violations. People started actually enjoying their homes again, instead of constantly looking over their shoulders for HOA enforcement. In September, as the weather started to cool, I lit my first fire of the season. I sat in my living room, watching the flames dance in the fireplace, and felt a deep sense of satisfaction. This was my home. I had fought for the right to enjoy it on my own terms, within reason and within the law, and I had won. The smoke rising from my chimney that evening was negligible, just like the air quality report had proven. But its significance was enormous. It represented freedom from arbitrary authority, the victory of evidence over accusations, and the simple right of a homeowner to live peacefully in his own house. I raised my glass of whiskey toward the fire, a silent toast to perseverance, to justice, and to the simple pleasure of a warm home on a cold Colorado night. The fight had been worth it. Every moment of frustration, every dollar spent on reports and legal fees, every tense confrontation with Patricia had led to this moment of quiet satisfaction. Outside, the winter stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Inside, the fire crackled and popped, sending small sparks up the chimney where they disappeared harmlessly into the clean mountain air. Tomorrow I would get up and live my life, secure in the knowledge that my home was truly mine, and that no HOA president could take that away through fraudulent fines and manufactured violations. The neighborhood had learned an important lesson. HOAs existed to serve homeowners, not to rule over them. And I had learned that sometimes the smallest battles were worth fighting because they represented the largest principles. My chimney smoke, negligible and harmless, had become a symbol of something much greater, the right to be left alone to enjoy your property in peace, free from harassment and arbitrary authority. As I settled deeper into my chair, the warmth of the fire spreading through the room, I thought about Patricia and wondered if she had learned anything from the experience. Probably not. People like her rarely did, but that was her problem now, not mine. I had my home, my fireplace, and my peace of mind. The HOA was in better hands with Linda and the new board members, and the community was stronger for having gone through this trial and come out the other side with better systems and protections in place. The fire burned low as the evening wore on, and eventually I banked it and headed to bed. My last thought before sleep was simple and satisfying. Tomorrow I could light another fire if I wanted to, and the day after that, and the day after that, all winter long. Because that was my right as a homeowner, proven through evidence and defended through determination. And no HOA could ever take it away again.